My name is John McAuliffe. I'm the digital RF engineer at the ARRL lab, call sign W1DRF. That could be a short joke or it could stand for digital RF. I'll let you decide. And today I'll be talking about beyond repeaters and how far a technician class license can really take you. So to start out, let's do a little bit of background. Who am I? Because, I mean, none of you guys know me. Well, I work in that building, which is the ARRL HQ building, apparently. And specifically, it's across the street from this building, historical W1AW, that I'm sure many people who have ever taken a trip to headquarters have operated. And I work in the ARRL lab, which nowadays looks like this, which is a lot more computers and other sort of electronics equipment. You can see on my lab station, which is the station that's closest to the camera, I've got a bunch of monitors that are half dismantled, trying to fix them. But that was just a personal project of mine. And the ARRL lab has a workshop and lab benches, soldering irons, you know, anything you could really hope for in an electronics laboratory. It's where we do our product review testing, where it's in a screen room, which is an RF insulated room that's a little bit away from this. So, and then this is something we want to always showcase, the W1HQ station. I manage this station, you know, make sure everything stays up and running and, you know, all the radios are acting nice and that people also have some toys so that they can more efficiently operate the station. And, yeah, I think that's enough fluff, or, you know, I'll talk a little bit more fluff. So something I've done recently is that I've been adding full remote capabilities to the W1HQ station. If you guys were here for the college amateur radio group where they were doing a remote operation of a flex radio that's in W1HQ using the W1AW call sign, that was using a lot of this technology. So yeah, I'm doing a few things, and but you know, we'll get back onto the main topic. So how many people here are technicians? Can raise the hands. All right, so most of the people here. Well, I didn't really expect this to be only for technicians, but for any ham who's interested in getting people into the hobby. And the easiest way to get people into ham radio is to give them some reasons why they should bother paying the FCC fees and taking the license exam. And technician is the most basic license you can get, so there's quite a lot you can do. And so an overview of what I'm really going to be talking about. I'm going to briefly cover what techs have privileges to, and then I'm going to talk about UHF frequencies and higher, and some of the operations that you can do on those higher frequencies. And then I'll talk a little bit about digital radio, satellites, and similar topics, which is something that a lot of people are interested in, especially the youngins. And then finally, I'll talk about HF CW privileges and how to build your own CW encoder and decoder. So what's a common thing we get in the ARRL lab is people get licensed and they get their radio license and it's all nice. They have their call sign. And they now think, okay, now what do I do with this? So the most common way hams start in the hobby is they get a little handheld and they access the local repeater. That's what I did, and that's what I think most hams do. And that's actually my first transceiver right there. I got a HTX 202 from my uncles. It was a hand-me-down. It was their first radio in the early 90s. So that's a fun one, N2QXH and N2QXI, great Elmers. But you know, things kind of gets a little old. And people get a little bored about accessing the local repeater, and you know they're talking to the same guys on there, and it's like, well, is this really all there is for ham radio? Is this like did I pay all this money for this license just to talk to some old guys on the repeater? And well, and then they might think, well, you know, maybe I just don't have a good enough license, and I should maybe upgrade. And so that's sort of the next question they ask is, you know, should I become a general, become an extra, and study my butt off on the general and study even harder for the extra to actually do anything with ham radio? You know, that's all well and fine, but the answer is really no. There's quite a lot you can do with your technician class license that does not involve repeaters, and is very interesting stuff to do in the hobby. So briefly, let's talk about technician class privileges. They got pretty much full privileges on UHF band, full privileges on the VHF band, and then they've got some limited privileges on HF, 10 meter. They've got full digital privileges there, but only with 100 watts, and they also get signal sideband voice and CW, also 100 watts, and they also, anywhere you have privileges, you can always operate CW. So. And they get 15, 40, and 80 meter CW privileges. So, you know, you can actually have quite a lot with your technician class license, especially on the higher frequencies than UHF, 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, and even higher, 10 gigahertz. So this is not even the full scope of it, but there's quite a lot of stuff you can do with just these frequencies. And you know, let's talk about some of that stuff. So. UHF and microwave frequencies are probably an underutilized part of ham radio. People, oftentimes they operate 70 centimeters, and that's all well and fine, but there's actually higher frequencies that we have privileges on, specifically 23 and 33 centimeters. You can operate full 1500 watts. A lot of people get confused about that, but no, you can operate 1500 watts pretty much anywhere you have privileges except for 60 meters and some other, there's some other limitations because of tech licenses, but you can operate 1500 watts, but you do have to be careful. You can't cause any interference, and it's it's an often overlooked part of the hobby because despite the capabilities of what you can do on these frequencies, a lot of work in data communications goes on in 33 centimeters. You know, a lot of your water meters and other things talk over 900 megahertz. It's a unlicensed spectrum that has some limited operating privileges for unlicensed use, such as the LoRaWAN network, which uses mesh networks, and so there's a lot of stuff that you can do on these frequencies. But a lot of the commercial hardware that's built for unlicensed operation can be repurposed for amateur radio. And with sped spectrum, which is a common use of 33 centimeters, you can operate actually as a ham license up to 10 watts. And that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but you can do very, very long distance data links with just 10 watts on spread spectrum and 23 centimeters. It's very inexpensive. You know, these microcontrollers and other boards, they cost you $20, $30, and you program them yourself. You can do whatever you want, or you can even copy other people's programs and load them in there. And just the only thing is, you can't cause interference to ISM users. That's industrial, scientific, and medical. But there's again a lot of potential for DIY projects on this band, and a few examples of this are an amateur TV, which I'll go more in depth in a minute. You can also modify many Motorola and Kenwood transceiver into Part 97 handhelds. Meshtastic is a very fun one. People use a Heltec V3, and they flash this firmware. It's already written for you. And it has a ham radio mode where you can basically bring your transmissions into FCC spec, but if you don't want to do that, you can do encrypted communications, although not as a ham radio operator, but so you'll have to follow the 1 watt rule for the other users of the band. But what if DIY isn't your thing? Well, EME is also a very common 900 megahertz activity that involves bouncing a signal off the moon back to the Earth. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on as well. And just a quick sidebar on amateur TV, because I met a nice amateur radio club out of Canada who were very active on amateur TV, and especially digital amateur TV. And in the old days of amateur TV, it was not easy to get on the air. You had to have specialized equipment, video cameras and everything else like that were a little harder to get back then. You were also only restricted to pretty much one band. Most of it was on 70 centimeters. But nowadays, it's the opposite. You can get started with amateur TV with only $30, and by repurposing first-person cameras from drones to get very high-quality video feeds at 5.8 gigahertz. A little bit further reading on that at the end of the presentation. Another thing is people use a Raspberry Pi, and they use an operating system called Dragon OS, which has a bunch of programs written by hams on its app store, and you can use that to, with an SDR, oftentimes a Lime SDR, to do multi-band operation with amateur TV. So it's a very interesting, interesting part of the spectrum. And continuing on that sort of thought process, we have high-speed multimedia, which doesn't mean anything to most people, but it's what Arden uses and it's what Hamnet uses. And there's a lot of talk about ham radio and talking about the internet applications of it. Well, this is one of them. So you can flash custom firmware on routers and modems, and when you do this, you bring the transmissions on those routers to FCC spec so that you can operate as an amateur radio operator, and you get your 10 watts out of. You can increase the power out of them to 10 watts, and also you can use whatever antennas you want to get even more gain and operation out of it. And this is perfect for long distance Wi-Fi links. Some people have big properties and they like to basically have a bunch of cameras around, and if you have a Arden node at the camera, you can link it to your other Arden nodes with other cameras and get very good surveillance of your property if you so like. And it's your system. You own it, you control it. It's not anyone else's. And that's, you get full control over the data and information sent on your network, and you choose also how you bridge to other people's networks, which is another thing Arden can do. You can bridge into other ham radio operators' networks if they allow you to and if you want to. So again, this is something that we also have demonstrated in the lab booth, where we have an Arden camera outside the building, and it's pumping video feed into a big screen that's inside the lab booth. So there's a lot of applications to Arden, especially also for phones and using VoIP, voice over IP, to talk to other hams using Arden meshes. And then there's also ModelCraft. ModelCraft is actually one of the only exceptions to the FCC encryption rule. So you're allowed to encrypt your communications to ModelCraft as an amateur radio operator, and it's an entire hobby within itself. You're only limited to 1 watt when you do this, but you can do it on 6 meters and get very, very long distance communications to your drone or to your boat or whatever sort of equipment you're trying to use. This is and that's just the rules there for the FCC rules. And when you combine this with other aspects of amateur radio, such as amateur TV, you can do first-person view piloting of ModelCraft, which is an interesting one. But there are some limitations by the FAA in that, and this has been something that the amateur radio operators have been kind of upset about. The FAA basically said, oh, well, you now need a drone license if you got a drone that weighs over half a pound. So there are drones that weigh less than that you don't need a license to operate. But boats and other ModelCraft are not regulated. So, cars and other things, if you got a nice body of water, it can be a fun hobby. And, this is some way that, especially for kids, people who are really young, and I'm sure there's a lot of hams around here that started being a ham when they were, 10, 11 years old. This is a fun way of getting the kids nowadays into ham radio. And it gives them something to, some interest in getting licensed. So continuing on that note, let's talk on lower frequencies. Let's talk about what you can actually do with VHF and UHF. And so HF digital privileges exist for text. You can actually do 200 watts on digital. It's perfect for weak signal modes, especially if you're interested in doing some sort of homebrew sort of thing or something related to that. And you don't need to use an amplifier or anything else like that. And nowadays, the bands are hopping. This is a very good solar cycle that you're able to make contacts with across the world with only about 10 watts operating power, and that's what we were able to do in W1HQ a few weeks back. We were able to make a contact all the way in Bangladesh with a couple watts on FT8. So it can be pretty magical, especially if that's something you're interested in getting involved in. And this is something oftentimes people do with the higher class licenses, but you can do this with just a tech. And you also get single sideband voice privileges, also with 200 watts. And that's just worth mentioning, although it's a limited part of the spectrum. So on that note, long distance UHF and VHF. So we don't normally think of UHF and VHF as long distance communication modes, but actually you can get very, very long distances with a VHF or UHF station. 6-meter operation is one of these ways that you can make long distance contacts. In May through August, which are the summer months, you're going to be able to make 6,500 mile plus contacts on 6 meters, especially if you live near one of the coasts. And that can be an amazing part of the, that can be something that anyone can do in ham radio. And there's also the EME operation, which I'll go into more depth in a little bit. But with EME, you can do up to 12,000 miles, which is the full full radius of the, you can go on the full circumference of the Earth, wrong word there. Circumference of the Earth with just 50 to 100 watts using some of the digital modes that exist. JT65 is now, well, it's a little outdated now. People are now using, I believe, Q65, but you can do quite a lot with just 50 to 100 watts on digital with EME operation. And so that's another reason that you don't really need to worry about upgrading your license. If you are interested in talking across the world, you can do this all on the technician class license privileges. Long distance VHF and UHF, to close out the topics, I'm talking 2 meters, 70 centimeters. This all uses tropospheric propagation. Tropospheric propagation is not as great as ionospheric propagation. It depends a lot on the weather. But you can still allow for communications in excess of 2,000 miles. If you're in times of good weather, that's when there's good atmospheric pressure. It allows for signals to reflect off of the atmosphere and be sent as far as you need them to be sent. And near water, if you live near one of the Great Lakes, or if you live near one of the coasts, this can be used to allow for up to 3,000 mile contacts using VHF and UHF frequencies. So this is a very interesting part of what hams are able to do. And I'm just going to look at my time and see how I'm doing. Ooh, I'm moving quickly. Oh my goodness. All right, so I guess I'll slow things down a little bit here, and let's talk briefly about satellite communication. Satellite communications, you just need a dual band transceiver. Even a handheld can make a satellite contact with just 5 watts, which is pretty amazing if you think about it. There's a bunch of satellites that are always circling around overhead for amateur radio. They've got something called a transverter on them, so you transmit on, let's say, 2 meters, you're receiving on 70 centimeters, or vice versa. And the annoying thing about satellites is that you always have to factor in for Doppler shift, which is basically the motion of the satellite in reference to your location, and tuning your frequency so that the frequency the satellite is hearing is the proper frequency that it needs to hear, which may not be the frequency you're transmitting at the transmitter because of the effects of Doppler shift. But people do this with handhelds. They save a bunch of frequencies in the memory channel of the handhelds, and when they start losing the satellite, they just switch the memory channel, and then they're good to go. And they do this repeatedly until until the satellite's out of range. And satellites are always overhead. There's usually 1 or 2 that you can hit if you're interested in that. And you can do it with just 5 watts of power with a directional antenna. You go outside and hook it up to your transceiver. And you also need a transverter as well to make sure that that your transmitter is not affecting your receiver. And just point it up at the sky, roughly where the satellite is, and you'll make a contact. Satellites have been a thing in ham radio since very early days. First satellite was Oscar 1, which just had a Morse code hello on it, so you couldn't even make contacts with it, but you could hear it up in the sky. And satellites are very forgiving. They got pretty wide bands, so even if you're not perfectly on frequency, you'll still hear it. And again, all you need is dual band transceiver, or 2 transceivers, a duplexer, directional antenna, and tracking software. Easy to get into and at a very low budget. And here's some examples of satellite software. Some of these are paid and some of these are free. So SAT-PC32 by DK1TB is a very popular one. We have one in W1HQ for the ICOM radio that we have in there for doing satellite operation. A great piece of software automatically tunes the radio for what frequency it needs to be on, compensating for the Doppler shift, moves the rotor around that we have on the roof so that the antenna is always pointing at the satellite. But you don't need anything that fancy. Mac Doppler is a very fun one for Mac users. Satellite Explorer Pro is another one that people like to use, W9KE. That's a free one from what I remember. Ham Radio Deluxe, which is a very complete suite of other ham radio applications, but it does include a satellite tracker and satellite software. AMSAT Droid by AMSAT's an app on your phone that you can use. So if you like to operate with your handheld and make a satellite contact, you can just have your phone set to alert you when there's going to be a satellite overhead, and it will tell you what frequency to be on, and it will tell you where to point your antenna. So it's a nice piece of software, and there's many more than that. So and then let's close out. Let's talk HFCW operation. So technician class licenses, they have privileges on HF for doing CW operation. CW is continuous wave, which is just Morse code. So as a refresher, we have as the operating privileges on HF for technicians 10, 15, 40, and 80 meters. And you're allowed up to 200 watts of power on CW on these frequencies. But you don't actually need to learn CW to operate CW. And this is something that people oftentimes neglect. There's softwares that exist for your computer that you can install on your computer, plug your audio cable from your computer into your radio, and it will both decode and encode the CW for you. Common one is CWTY by WD6CNF, which is a free one. Hamscope by KD5HIO, which is a nice program, and FLDigi, which is what people use in W1AW to do the morning bulletins, as well as some of the operations that we have in there. And that's written by W1HKJ, and all these softwares are free. They're free to install. They work very well. The other thing about FLDigi is that it also does RIDI operation, which is a nice addition, and we also use FLDigi for the RIDI bulletins that we run in W1AW. And then, briefly, let's talk. So the ARRL lab has not put together too many projects over the years, especially recently. And we thought that this was worth changing. So we decided that, you can build your own CW encoder and decoder yourself, and it can be a portable unit you can carry around with you. And if you plug in something, it will listen and listen to CW, and then you can type on the keyboard, and it will send CW back, and you can use the potentiometer to adjust the keying speed. So all the materials and schematics and code, and also the part files for actually making this box yourself are, at that QR code on the website that goes to my GitHub, where all this stuff has been compiled into one page, where you can easily just download the programs and start doing things with CW operation without actually having to learn CW. And we've had this running in the lab booth for the past couple of days, this little CW encoder and decoder. And it works very well. In my experience, it does up to about 40 words per minute. After 40 words per minute, it gets a little fussy with the decoding part of things. And with the encoding, because I do know many hams that get very mad at the hams that send CW at like 200 words per minute using software. So as a kindness to them, I limited this one to just 40 words per minute, although it's not hard to change that in my program. So So yeah, it's here. I may pass this around, and also the boxes, in case you don't have a 3D printer to actually make the box. We are raffling off those boxes over there in the corner. And let's talk a little bit to bring it back to the ARRL lab. The ARRL lab has a technical information service. We can help you with implementing these technologies, building this project, getting people interested in amateur radio, ideas and things like that. And if you can call in if you're an ARRL member, and we'll answer whatever your technical question is. We also have an RFI program where if you've got RFI in your neighborhood, we can help you with the RFI issue, talk to the power companies, talk to other people, and deal with that. And then it's an ARRL membership benefit. And then as a further reading, so a lot of the stuff I discussed in this presentation is on our website under arrl.org/digital-projects, arrl.org/digital-projects. You can access that with that QR code. And that closes out my presentation. So thank you very much. Please join the ARRL and support amateur radio in the United States. And thank you for coming to my presentation. So I'd like to take this time to answer some questions from the audience. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I noticed this. You know how you have the HF band, you got, what, 20 or 40 kilohertz for voice and that's not enough. Why don't they open up more like 40 and 80, use the other band, get more voice samples? And why are they just limiting most of that to CW? I think they need to change.
So this goes back to the early days of amateur radio history. There used to be 5 license classes: novice, technician, general, advanced, and extra. And to answer your question there, which is why are technicians limited to just Morse code on the lower HF frequencies like 15 meters, 40 meters, and 80 meters? Back in those days, there was a code test where you had to actually know how to do Morse code to become a ham license. And this was actually an international requirement because they wanted people who were amateur radio licenses to be able to talk over Morse code in the case of some sort of international emergency using the HF bands. And the Morse code requirement doesn't exist anymore today. So that has gone away with, but the idea kind of stuck where certain segments of the bands are reserved for Morse code practice, and the incentive for people to upgrade their license to, let's say, a general or an extra is the fact that you do get further operations on these lower frequencies. But again, you can do quite a lot with just Morse code on these frequencies, even if it's not a voice. There's quite a lot a technician can do even then. And also 10 meters with where the solar cycle is right now and what propagation is looking like, you can oftentimes get as good or better propagation on 10 meters than you can on these lower frequencies. So, it's an FCC rule, and I don't know if there's really any interest in changing it, but that's what people are. Well, I mean, that's definitely true, but also younger people, they're more interested, at least in my experience, on the sort of build-it-yourself DIY aspects of the hobby from at least from what I've seen, image communications and things like that, digital operations. And this is something a friend of mine is interested in sending images to things over long distances, and he's not a ham, and he was doing commands over 900 megahertz using unlicensed equipment, unlicensed spectrum, and but he quickly found the limitation of it, because even when you have to send a pretty small image, it takes forever to send using unlicensed privileges, and so he's interested in getting his ham license and doing some images on 70 centimeters. And again, so From what I know, kids they nowadays with the phones and everything, they kind of are they kind of understand like, okay, I could get a ham radio license, or if my telephone, I can talk to somebody in Great Britain for no extra cost nowadays. And so there hasn't been too much incentive, I think, and too much push on the FCC's end to open up those spectrums, and not too much interest, I think, from especially younger people in having more voice with the technician class license. Does that answer your question, ma'am?
Younger people love their pets, their cell phones, their voice, their pets, especially girls and women. We're the ones interested in digital, more digital stuff, and even voice. More bands. Give a-
You can write a letter to the FCC, petition them for some rule-making changes, and we'll see.
I'm an extra class, but
I get it.
I'd like to see more people bring it up hobby. I'm a YL in an extra class. I would love to see more people come there.
I agree, and the purpose of this presentation, and I hope some of you guys can take the recording that's going to be up on the YouTube later of this and bring it to your ham clubs and say, all right, like, look, here's how we can get people licensed. Here's some things they can do on the spectrum that even just techs have access to. Well, but thank you, ma'am. I appreciate the comments. So I see another question.
Yeah, you went very quickly through the section on high-speed multimedia. Can you
Yes.
talk a little bit more about the hardware involved and what's sort of entry-level cost to do that kind of thing?
Yes, of course. So let me go back to my high-speed multimedia slide. So to start with HSMM, there's a list of routers that support Arden. They're on the Arden website, and I linked to it in the web page that is at the end of the presentation. And a lot of Ubiquiti routers and other things support the Arden firmware. You can buy a lot of this equipment for pretty cheap, $10, $20, $30, depending on your interest. And the IP camera, like the one that's in the lab booth, is only, I think, maybe $20 to buy. So it can be pretty low cost to get started, and then there's a lot you can do with just upgrading the equipment. So if you decide to buy an amplifier to amplify the output of the router to a 10-watt output, that would cost you some extra money. And then also using directional antennas, dish antennas, to get higher gain in specific directions so that you can make an even longer link. Arden's been used a lot for repeater linking nowadays, especially for emergency communications. People like having the idea of something that operates at high speed and is sort of internet-based, but also in the case of the internet being down, will still remain up for amateur radio operations. There's currently some progress going in our MCOM department for implementing a deployable Arden system for emergency relief, and that's been going, and the New England Mesh Network Group has been working very hard on setting up mesh networks in all the New England states for this emergency communications and disaster relief, but these are permanent mesh networks that will stay there for quite a while. Does that answer your question, sir?
So just, sorry, to be clear about this or feedback. So the minimum setup you would need, for example, if I want to do streaming of video, I
Yeah.
need a camera, I need a router, and then I need another router,
Yep.
and then I need a computer.
Yep.
That would need, okay.
Yeah.
Because that's something I think most people could do. Right? I mean,
Yeah, most people can do it. Again, IP cameras aren't too expensive, and even without using Arden for streaming video, if you repurpose a commercial drone camera, which you can do for about $30, buy these cameras for about $30, you can repurpose them for amateur usage. They operate on 5.8 gigahertz, and you can do a similar sort of video streaming thing because these FPV cameras also come with a receiver. So you come, a lot of the equipment's already there when you buy it. And it's something you can do with amateur radio with just your technician class license and doing that operation. I see another question. Yeah, so in the links I include at the end, there are tutorials for doing these sorts of operations. The BATV, British Amateur Radio Club, British Amateur TV Club, sorry, it puts out a lot of information on how to do this. Amateur TV is kind of big in Europe. They actually have a geostationary satellite for amateur TV usage over there. And so they've been, there's a lot of activity right now in Europe for amateur TV, and I want to see some more of it in the United States.